Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, starting with Nun Vav Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara is discussing Arei Levim that has 2,000 amos as its tchum, and the Torah tells us the first 1,000 amos surrounding the ear is called a migrash. It's uncultivated, it's an open area, and only beyond that is the rest of the tchum, which is sados and kromim. The Brisa stated that the migrash is a revia. Explains Rava, how do you get to a revia? He says if we're talking about an ear lavim that is 2,000 by 2,000 amos, and we go then 2,000 amos in each direction for its tchum, so then the entire area is really 6,000 by 6,000 squared amos, coming out to be 36 squared million amos. Then if you then look at the techumim and the chronos that belong to the migrash, it comes out to be that there are 8 million squared amos of the techumim and 4 million squared amos of the chronos that belong to the migrash. Of those 12, then, the Gemara explains, you can then find the revia. How? Because since this area is not a ear that is really squared, but really it's a circle, so therefore you have to then deduct a quarter, because the space between the circle and this corner of the square comes out to be a difference of a quarter. So therefore, the 12 that we had just mentioned really is 9. 9 that belongs to the migrash. 9 that is into 36 comes out to be 1 quarter. The Gemara now brings other ways of explaining this brisa that says a migrash is a revia. Says the Gemara, Abaye Omar, Mashkachas lonami b'mato dehavya alpha b'alpha. Abaye explains we can come to this calculation if we have a city that's 1,000 by 1,000. That's the area of the city of the Ir Levim that we're talking about. And therefore we come out, Techumin kama have. How much would be the Techumim of such a city? So it would come out to be that you could have 2,000 amos in each direction by 1,000 amo, which is the area of this would be 2,000 by 1,000, since we're talking about a city that's 1,000 by 1,000. So the tchum would go 2,000 by 1,000 in 4 different directions. That'll be a total of 8 million squared amos. V'tamnyo. Kronos kamo have. How much are the corners? Shitzar, because the corners, since the corners are always going to be 2,000 by 2,000, and it's 4 corners, so it comes out to be 8 million squared amos. So it comes out to be, so far we've calculated 8 plus the 16 gives us 24 million squared amos. Okay, so that's the whole area of this city, of this Ir Levim, with its tchumim and its chronos. Top of Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Now the Gemara explains Dal Arba Techumim. If you take away 4 tchum that relate to the migrash, and each tchum, right, with this migrash would be 1,000 by 1,000, and you have 4 different directions, so that's already 4. Ve'arba de kronos, and then you have each corner, which again, each corner would be 1,000 by 1,000. And it's 4 corners, so another 4. So you have 8 altogether that belongs to the migrash. Tamno, says the Gemara, that is going to be 8. 4 and 4 is 8. So ask the Gemara, how is this going to be a revia? According to Abaye, Tilsahave, this is a third. 8 is only is a third of the 24. So therefore, how can you get to a quarter? Says the Gemara, Misavis biribua kamar. Why do you think that we're talking about a ribua? When I stated we're talking about 1,000 by 1,000, I'm talking about a circle. The diameter is 1,000 by the other side is diameter 1,000. Bigula kamar. Kama ribua Yeser al ha'igul. How much more is a square when we square off around a circle? Revia, it's a quarter. So therefore it comes out that which we said is 8, referring to the migrash, we take off a quarter, which would be 2. We're left with 6. So now 24 divided by 6 gives us indeed a quarter. Dal revia, pashu lahu shisa, v'shisa mechav dal revia have. We're left with 6 going into 24, and that's indeed a quarter. So that now is Rav's explanation. We're talking about 2,000 by 2,000 is the dimensions of the Ir Levim with his calculation. Abai explains we're talking about an Ir Levim of 1,000 by 1,000 with his calculation. Each one explains how the migrash could be a revia. Now the Gemara brings a third way of explaining. Ravina has another explanation. My revia, what's meant by revia in the Braisa, that a migrash is a revia? So he learns revia de techumin. That means to say that which surrounds, the migrash which surrounds the Ir Levim is of the techumim and not the corners. And therefore it comes to the following calculation. If you have 2,000 by 2,000, he goes with that squared Ir Levim. That is the area of the Ir Levim. And then you have 2,000 amos in each direction for its tchum. So essentially you have 6,000 by 6,000 amos, which comes out to be 36 million squared amos. If you take that, he says, and then you divide that by the 8 million squared amos of the tchumim that relate to the migrash, it comes out to be 1/4, because since every side is going to be 2 by 1. In other words, 2,000 by 1,000. And then you have 4 sides, it comes out to be 8. So you then divide the 32 into 8 and you have 1/4. Rav Ashi has a fourth interpretation of the Braisa that says migrash is revia. But he says now exactly the opposite of what we just said in the name of Ravina. Instead of the migrash surrounding the techumim and not the corners, he says the opposite. It surrounds the corners and not the techumim, not the sides. My revia. So what's meant by revia? Revia de kronos. It surrounds the corners. And therefore, if you make the following calculation and say, since each of the kronos indeed is going to be 2,000 by 2,000, and you have all 4 corners, so therefore it comes out to be 16 million squared amos, and then you divide that into the corner, which is 1 amma by 1 amma for 4 corners. 1,000 by 1,000 in 4 corners comes out to be 4. So 16 divided by 4 gives you the revia of the migrash. Omar le Ravina le Rav Ashi. Ravina now challenges Rav Ashi's opinion that explains that the migrash only surrounds the corners but not the sides of the Ir Mikla, of the Ir Levim. Revia, he says, V'ho saviv ksiv, it says it goes around. The pasuk that we learned the migrash from says umigrashei ha'arim asher titnu la'levim mikir ha'ir v'chutza elef amas saviv, and that the Gemara brought that the Torah says saviv es ha'ir be'elef is mashma, that it surrounds the entire Ir Levim with 1,000 amos as a migrash. So how can you say it only surrounds the corners but not the sides? Answers Rav Ashi, Mike saviv. Saviv de kronos. It means saviv of the corners. The ilotei mahach, and he proves himself. If you don't say like I'm saying, then gabe oila, in regards to the korban oila, dichsiv, it's written, vezarku es hadom ala mizbeach saviv, that they sprinkle, the kohanim sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach saviv. Hochanami saviv mamra, you're going to say it goes all the way around? Certainly not. Elamai saviv, what's meant by saviv? Saviv de kronos, around the corners. So to over here, hachanami my saviv de kronos. So the way that saviv is learned that it means that the migrash is saviv of the corners of the Ir Levim. Omra le Rav Chaviv mechizno le Rav Ashi. He asks Rav Ashi, v'ha'ika mursha de karnasa, but the corners, they go into the migrash. And since they protrude into the migrash, that means that the migrash of 1,000 amos, which is surrounding the corners, cannot be really 1,000 because part of that is being protruded by the corners of the boundary of the Ir Levim. Answers of Ashi b'mata igulusa. We're talking about a circular city, and therefore there's no protrusion. Ask the Gemara, v'harivua. What we really meant to ask to begin with was that even if you have a circular city of an Ir Levim, it still is going to be squared off. So the squaring off that you do will then protrude into the migrash. So it can't be a full 1,000 amos. It has to be less because it's going into the migrash. Says Rav Ashi to then explain and defend himself. When do we say that is indeed as if it were squared off? Ribue vadai mimrabana. We say it halachically, but we don't say that it's going to then affect the actual migrash itself. Halachically, we say that it's squared off, so that will then measure the techumim. Or in this case, in the Ir Levim, we'll also then have where we're going to have also the measurements start from. But that's halachically. In terms of the actual migrash itself, it's not going to affect the uncultivated area of the migrash. That still will remain 1,000 amos. Now Rav Chaniloi from Mechuza asked Rav Ashi on his understanding that the migrash is surrounding only the corners. Michti, let us see. Now we said earlier that when you have there we're talking about a regular city, and we say that if that city, let's say, is round, so we'll square it off, and then we'll make tichumim on all directions, whereby then we'll square that off. So we said over there that if we're talking about, for example, a city, the circular city that is in the middle is going to be, for example, 2,000 by 2,000, and you go then 2,000 amos in each direction as a tchum, so it won't be sufficient to go 2,000 amos to the corner. You'd have to then say it's 2,800 amos, because the 2,000 amos of the tchum in each direction is talking about when you go to a straight line. But when you get diagonally to the end, you need to add another 800 square amos. So he asks, Kama meruba yeser hala eagle, how much is a square more than the circle that it is surrounding? Revia is going to be a quarter, or essentially it's a quarter more, or it's 1/3 of the circle. So says the Gemara, Hani tamni meya. Is this going to be then the 800 that we said before? No. If you have 2,000, then it will not come out to be 800. It'll come out to be much less. If you divide 2,000 by 1/3, you'll only get to be 600 and 666 and 2/3. As the Gemara says now, Shis meya v'shisin v'sheva nikit lilta have. It'll only come out to be, again, 2,000 divided by 1/3, which is the ratio between the circle and the square around it, is going to be 666 and 2/3 square amos. Says the Gemara, Amarle, Rav Ashi defends himself, Hani mili bi'igula migo ravua. That's talking about when you have a space between the circle and the corner of the square around it. That's talking about that area over there. That is the difference. However, when we're talking about drawing to the diagonal to the corner, that you need more. The Omar Mar, for Mar said, Kol amta beribua, every amma of its quarter, amta v'trei chumshi balachsoina, will end up being 1 2/5 of its diagonal. In other words, it will come out to be that if you want to then take a line and then diagonally make it, then you'll have to then add and say it's 1 times 1.4. In this case, you have 2,000 amos tchum going in both directions, in all directions rather, and it's a straight line. But to make the diagonal, you have to then multiply 1.4 to the 2,000, where you get 2,800.